ですかね。来た。ちょっと音声の確認とかしつつ、大丈夫そうかな。ちょっと待って宣伝をしてって感じですかね。もうそろそろいいかしら。よいしょっと。よいしょっと。来い。ポチー。来た。よし。久々だな、マッチング待ち。なんか最近あんまり配信をしてなかったですね。ちょっと忙しかったのか？忙しかったんだろうか、果たして。なんか忙しかったような気もする。ちょっとダラダラしますか。ローポリのね、なんか急な話ですけど、急に話し始めますけど、ローポリのゲーム作ってみたいなとかね、思っててですね。ローポリっていいですよね。セガサターンぐらいの感じのね、なんかローポリのゲーム作りたいなと思ってたんですけど、じゃあなんでローポリにしたのって言われたら、ちょっと困っちゃいますよね。ちょっとお酒いただきます。すいません。なんでローポリ、このゲームがローポリである意味あるんですかみたいなこと言われたら、うってなります。よいしょ。さて、チャンネル登録お願いします。はい。というわけで、チャンネル登録お願いしておこう。で、今日は、音 音声の方にチャンネル登録お願いして、で今日はなんかあんまり低い声出してボソボソ喋っちゃダメなんで、ちょっと喋るときにはこう自分は喋ってるんだぞという意識を持ちながら喋る。そうしましょう。配信してるんだからせっかく。さて、皆さん土曜の夜はいかがお過ごしでしょうか。僕は今日は仕事でした。普通にガビーン。なんていうんですかね。ローポリでゲーム作りたいな。なんかちょっとシューティングみたいな感じにして、でもな、シューティングって言ってもな、自分がそこまでシューティング、なんていうんですかね、ロックマンダッシュ的なやつを想像してるんですけどね。どうですかね、ロックマンダッシュ。ロックマンダッシュの動画とかって流してもいいもんなんですか？ちょっとよくわかんないんですけど。2だね、僕は。1はよく知らん。ね。やばい。超 CM が流れてる。ランチャンラン。そうそう、こういう感じのね、ローポリやりたいっすよね。このぐらいの感じがいいんだけど。でもこれ作るの大変そうだな。こんなローポリですよっつっても。これは顔に絵が描いてあるだけなのかな？多分。そうですよね。うんうん。はいはいはい。ここに線とか入ってるしね。いけるんちゃうんか。このぐらい。いや、このぐらいとか言って、やばい。ゲーム作ったことないやつ出てる。ゲーム作ったことないやつが言いがちな。あ、これぐらいならできそうだなという間違った考え。3D ゲームを作ったことないやつが言っております。そう。これぐらいなんでいけんちゃう？だってこう、ブレンダーでこうさ、とか言って。ねえ、作って回すだけっしょ、みたいな。難しいんやってと。いいなぁ。かっこいい顔。やっぱロックマンダッシュって良かったですよね、多分。周りに持ってる人いなかったけど。なんかとてつもない何かがあると思うんだ、ここに。ないかな。あ、博士が出てる。いいですね。ちょっとこのぐらい、このぐらい、このぐらいなのか。このレベルのポリゴン作れるようになりたいな。おっと、平面だね。おもろ。はいはい。大いなる遺産が。 グレートヘリテージみたいなやつです。大いなる遺産みたいな小説ありましたよね。すごい。振り仮名も振ってあるぜ。漢字に。お、なんだそのマーク。おーっと演出が。はいはい。でもこれ綺麗だな。こんな綺麗なのか。ゲームシーンを見よう。ゲームシーンとシームレスなのやばいよな。わお。ふんふん。イベント多いな。おっと、ボスや。危ない危ない危ない危ない。いいなぁ。ローポリのキャラとかあんま作ったことないんだけれども、これぐらいならいけるんじゃないかと思ってしまうんだけど。気のせいだろうか。ほうほうほう。ロックマンダッシュの動画を見る回になってる。いけないもんか。はいはい。ああ、死んでる。死んでるというか、なんか、片手がロボットのキャラクターいいですよね。今ちょっとね、何がおじいちゃんなんだ。禁断の地どういう話だろう。全然わからん。記憶を失ってる。そんなバナナ悪いやつじゃねえのか。うわあ、すごいな。このぐらいを目指そう。次作るゲームのローポリは。大変そうだけどな。バトーみたいなやつがいるな。おお、かっこいい。これとんでもない金かかってんだろうな。でもこれでもさてと。じゃあローポリの作り方動画でも見ながら誰が来るのを待ちますか。音楽を消そう。よいしょ。
Learn how to make really cool stuff in 3D software. You might not have done it, you might have dabbled in it a little bit. In this tutorial, what I'm going to be doing is trying to take one video and introduce a lot of the fundamental things, the things you really need to get started. And I'm going to show you how to do it in a free software called Blender that you can very easily download without an account or a password or anything like that. So you can see here, this is the final result. I'm going to show you first of all, the software itself, just the very basics, not covering all the thousands of different things. And then I'm going to take you step by step after that through the making of this character here and how to render it out as a final result. And you can use this same low poly modeling technique here, which is really simple and beginner friendly, to make all sorts of things. So hopefully this video grabs your interest if you want to learn as an absolute beginner. If you already know something about Blender, maybe this is just a little bit too basic and repetitive, but this is definitely more for absolute beginners, people who really don't know anything and they just want a simple video that's going to make it make sense. And you can also, after an hour or so, walk away with something that you can feel really good about, a final result. And from there you can choose if you want to go on and learn more about the discipline of 3D modeling, maybe even animation later on. So let's get into the video, and I hope you enjoy. I will be adding some timestamps so it can make it easier for you guys, the different chapters, and you can bounce back and forth if you get stuck. Let's hop in.
So getting your hands on Blender is quite simple. You go to your internet browser, you can type in blender.org, open up the site. Here, that's viewport. This is where everything happens. This is where we see our objects, where we add things in, where we can set up our layout. Now, I'm not going to be covering navigation just yet. I promise I'll get into that in a bit. But for now, I'm just explaining what these different windows are, or these different boxes. Going on to this little box that sits up here, that is our scene outliner. And essentially what we see here is the different items and objects that are in our scene. It really is a great organizational tool, and if you're a beginner, this really makes things easier as well. Getting organized, especially when your projects get a little bit bigger, is one of the most important things you can learn as a beginner. And what you can see here is these collections. Now, collections are essentially just these things you can create where you can group different objects in your 3D scene together. You can put them in that group. Look at it almost like layers in Photoshop. I'm not saying they are layers, but you can almost look at it like that in a sense, if that helps you visualize it. You can add in different collections, and you can also name the different objects. You can even directly come here and click on these objects instead of actually coming into your scene and left clicking on an object. The outliner is just another way you can visualize what's in your scene and select things. You can even go to the drop down and see more information about certain objects or what relationship they have to different objects. Now, don't worry if that doesn't make any sense to you. You don't need to know that right now. If it doesn't make sense, I will explain it later on in the tutorial if it's relevant to what we're doing. But that is our scene outliner essentially. And now we have that out of the way, we can come down here to our properties. And this is where different things that you do in Blender, you can see their properties. For example, let me just click on an object. Say, for example, you just left click on the cube to select it. Then you can go over here to all of the different properties. So if you click on this little tab, which is the materials property, the properties of the material that this thing has are here. So we can change values, we can change different sets of information that relate to the materials on this cube. Now we have, for example, over here, one called the object properties. So over here we can see the different transforms for these objects. Now transforms essentially, I'll get into that in a little bit, but it is the things that we can use to move an object in 3D space. So we have an X, Y, and a Z coordinate. So you can see, for example, here in the scene, we have the green line here, which is our Y coordinate, and the X is our X coordinate. So pretty simple. So essentially here you can see all of these are set to 0. And that's why our cube is in the middle of our world. If we move any one of these on a certain axis, you can see that the cube here is moving. Doesn't matter if you don't fully get it. I'll definitely get into that more later. But that's what properties are. Different things relating to the objects in our scene. We can come over here and see their properties. Now, sometimes some of these properties are not relating to an object in our scene. For example, if we click over here, we can see the world properties. And the world properties has to do with the environment, which you can't really see now because we're not rendering. So these three windows here are just the three main windows you need to know for now. Another thing I'll quickly mention is obviously just this little thing down here called the timeline. That's just when you're doing animating, and it's just like a timeline on a lot of different softwares, even 2D softwares. It's where you can come and scroll through on different frames and go to different time intervals within your 3D scene, and then you can change things, and this is where you would be doing your animation and stuff like that. So not too worried. It's just obviously just this here are just the three main windows you need to know for now. Another thing I'll quickly mention is obviously just this little thing down here called the timeline. That's just when you're doing animating, and it's just like a timeline on a lot of different softwares, even 2D softwares. It's where you can come and scroll through on different frames and go to different time intervals within your 3D scene, and then you can change things, and this is where you would be doing your animation and stuff like that. So not to worry about that right now because that's not what we're doing, but you get the general idea here. So just these three main ones, keep them in your mind. Okay, so now we're going to talk a little bit about navigation. It's actually pretty simple, but before we can even get into that, we have to talk about the number pad on the keyboard. So if you have ever seen a keyboard, you know that it has a little number pad down here. Now, some computers, or more like laptops, don't have this number pad. And if that's the case, there's something you can do about that, where you can make these numbers up here emulate a number pad. So let's just quickly go over into Edit. Once we have Blender open, Preferences, and then you're going to go over here to the input, go up to keyboard, and make sure emulate number pad is enabled if you don't have a number pad. So for me, I have a number pad, so I'm not going to have that enabled. Then I'm going to close that, and now you should be able to use your number pad as well. So while we're on the subject of number pad, you could actually go over here to View, go to Viewport, and then go to, for example, the front view, or go over here and go to the right view. But it's just good to use the number pad. So if you use 1 on your number pad, you can go into the front orthographic view. You can see over here it says front orthographic. If you press 3 on your number pad, you can go into the right orthographic view. You see it says right over here. 7 goes to the top. And if you want to, for example, go to the bottom, you can just hold in Control or Command 7 and then go to the bottom. So it just does the opposite of. So for example, it's the same with 1. If you press 1 on your number pad, it goes to the front view. What if you want to look from the back? So to make it the opposite of, you just hold in Control and then press 1, and now you're at the back view. So very, very easy. You can note that down, write it down. It's super simple. So just experiment with the numbers on your numpad, and that will take you into different views. Primarily, you're going to be working in 1 or the front orthographic view, so you'll almost always be using 1 or sometimes even 3 to see the side view. So not really that much you have to learn as far as changing the views. That's about the main thing we have to cover for now. But as far as actually moving around with the mouse, if you hold in the middle mouse button on your mouse and you hold it in and you move the mouse, you can actually rotate around like this. And that's pretty simple. So just middle mouse button holding it in. And if you want it to go side to side, like pan, all you have to do is hold in Shift, then the middle mouse button, and hold that in and just move side to side. And then if you want to zoom in and out, you can literally just roll the middle mouse button. There's also the option of holding in Control and then the middle mouse button, holding it in and then moving the mouse. But it really is just simpler and more intuitive just to roll the middle mouse button. So Blender's navigations are actually really easy. So just a quick recap: middle mouse button by itself, you can rotate. Shift, middle mouse button, you can move side to side, and then just rolling the middle mouse button, you can zoom in and out. Extremely simple. There's a lot more you could probably say, but those are some of the fundamental things as far as navigation goes. And this isn't really navigation, but what if you actually want to move an object? Well, all you have to do is left click on an object, and you can just come over here to these things here. They're called the tool panels, but you have this one here called the move. You can click on it, and then you can just click on any one of these handles here. So the red one is the x-axis, the y is, the green here is the y, and the blue is the z. If you press N on your keyboard, you can go over here to the control panel, go to item, and you can actually see here, these are our transforms. So the z here, for example, is the blue, so you can actually come here to the z under the location and move it that way or this way. It's just really the same thing, just a different way of doing it. And if you just press G, G is the shortcut key for moving things. So just pressing G, you can actually move things. And also you can go G and then press Z to restrict it to the Z axis, X to the X, or Y to the Y. So all the same thing, just a different way of doing it. If you don't really understand what I just did, don't worry. We'll be recapping it as we get into the modeling tutorial. So it's just something you need to be aware of. And then you have this one here called rotate and scale. And it's the exact same thing. Obviously with rotation, you still have these axes here, but now instead of moving, you're just rotating. So you can left click on one, or maybe left click on this red one, so you can rotate around the X, and the exact same thing. Over here in the properties, you can just come to the rotation and do the same thing manually here on these different vectors. And scale, I mean, need I explain the exact same principle. This time you're just dealing with scale. And you can also just click here on the tool. And by the way, the shortcuts here are S for scale and also R for rotate. So very, very easy navigation and also moving an object around. So I think we really have covered enough now just to get you to understand the basics. We'll now jump into the tutorial, and if there's anything you haven't understood, we'll just cover it slowly. I'll go over it again if need be, but you should be able to get it now that you're up to speed on Blender. So before we get into Blender and we do a little bit of modeling, you're probably going to need a model sheet, and that's just something to give you a little bit of reference. So you can actually see here on the screen that's now recording, here is a
picture of a screenshot that I actually took of a model that I've already modeled to practice. So what you can do is you can just use the print screen key on your keyboard, or just use the snip tool that comes with Windows. Just about every operating system has some sort of built-in tool to allow you to do screenshots or snips. So just go ahead, and you can also crop it if you want, just so you have the picture. And once you have that, you know, you should just have, like in this case, I just named mine girl, and here it is somewhere on my computer. What you're going to do is you're going to open up Blender. So in this case, I am using Blender 3.2. So I'm using Blender 3.2, and it's now opened up. Now the thing that's going to be different here for me, I'm just going to enable something that's an add-on. You don't have to do this. That just enables you guys to see over here the keys that I'm pressing. So that just should help you out a little bit. But you can see here we have the default scene, as we've already kind of covered in the previous part. But what you can do is you can press 1 on your front orthographic to go into your front orthographic view, so the number pad 1. You can also just go to view, viewport, and then go to front. And what you're going to do is you're going to get that image that you should have taken a screenshot of. So in this case, I have it somewhere on my computer. So I just named it girl, and you're just going to click on it and just drag it into the front orthographic view. Make sure not to drag it onto the cube, but just drag it somewhere here in the empty space. And you're going to see it adds it in. So now you can make it full screen again, and you have this image here in your front orthographic view. Now you can press G while you have it active, and if you're not sure if you have it active, what you can do, come up here to your scene collection. You can see the different objects, and by default it's going to be named empty over here. See that object called empty? So if it's not active, just click on it, and you should be able to go G and move it, and you can just move it over here, and then when you have it roughly in place, just left click. And what you can also do is, while you have it active, you can go over here to your properties panel that we talked about earlier, and you can go over here to object data properties down here in this little image, and you can come to this option here called opacity and just click on it, and then just click here and drag that down a little bit so it's almost see-through like that. Okay, so just a little bit is fine. And what you can now do is you can just hold your middle mouse button in and just move to the side like that. You can see here it's now in the 3D space. But what you can do is you can go G, Y, and move it back in your scene. So G and then Y to restrict it to the Y axis, just so it's not intersecting with the object we're going to be modeling. And if you go into your front orthographic view again by pressing 1 on your number pad, you can see here that we want this the front pose to be in the middle. So in this case, if it's not quite in the middle, all you can do is go G and then X to move it along the X, and just make sure it's as in the middle as it could possibly be here. And also over here, in fact, let's just quickly go and enable up here this thing called X-ray. And now we can see through. We still have this empty active. We can now make sure we have the feet sitting on the ground. So you can see this red line here. That kind of represents where the ground is. So we're going to go G, Z, and just move it down till that feet there are sitting right kind of on that red line. So now we have this front pose right in the middle there, and we can use that as a reference. And how do we get the side? So the side is simple. All we have to do now is go Shift D with this active. So Shift D, just right click to let go, and then type in RZ90 and hit enter. So RZ90, and if you press N to open up your properties panel and you go to item, you should be able to see here that on the Z it's rotated 90. So if it's not, just type in 90. Now press 3 on your number pad to go into the right orthographic view. You can see up here, right orthographic view, and now you can go G, Y, and move it on the Y till the side image is lined up here and kind of in the middle of where this cube is over here. You can also look at this blue line here as a reference. That's just the Z coordinate that you see in the right orthographic view. And make sure that she is roughly in the middle here. So G, Y to move it, and make sure you restrict it to the Y when you do, because we don't want to be moving it down or up now, because those feet, as you can see here, are still on that floor there, which is really good. So also with this one now on the side, we want to go G, X, and just move it over to the side like this. So when we go into our right orthographic view and we model with this cube here, that image is not intersecting with the mesh here. So now we have our front reference, and if we go into our right orthographic view by hitting 3 on the number pad, we have our side reference. Now before we lose anything, let's save this. So we're going to go File, Save As. I'm going to choose my desktop, and I'm just going to call it Girl, Low Poly, and I'm going to go Save As. And now it's saved. So when it comes to actually modeling something, we can use something called primitive objects. So you can see here, for example, we have one already in Blender called the default cube. So if you left click on it, you can see it becomes active. Also up here in the scene collection, you can see the cube.
消されるやつじゃん
And
こいつ
you could make this into any shape once you start editing it. And it's just so you understand. I'm going to quickly delete this. You don't have to follow along, but just so you understand. So if, for example, you didn't have an object, what you can do is you can go Shift A. Shift A brings up this add menu, and you can just go to the
消され
meshes.
ちゃう
Now the meshes are the actual things, the
Mesh.
topology that we'll model in 3D. And you have a whole bunch of objects here. Now all of these are just a bunch of points or vertices that make up an object in 3D space. So here is a cube, the one we already had. Here's a circle, here's a UV sphere. So if I add in a UV sphere, you can see
UV sphere.
same thing, but just it's shaped like a UV sphere. So I'm just gonna go ahead, add back in a cube. And the reason it is actually in the center of the world here when it's added in is because of this little thing here called the 3D cursor. Now over here, you can see above the move tool, there's a 3D cursor. If you click on that, you can click anywhere and it moves that 3D cursor. That 3D cursor is where things get placed by default in your scene. It's also a point you can use to rotate around as a transform. Won't get into that at the moment. But if I now went Shift A after moving that cursor and I added in maybe a sphere, it adds it in there. So it's important if that thing isn't in the center. First of all, just click back on the move tool if you've done that. If there's ever a situation where you need to get your cursor back to the center, you can go Shift S and you can see cursor to world origin as an option here. You can actually set the cursor to all sorts of places, but to have it in the center of the world, go to world origin. It's important that you understand that as a beginner kind of concept. Also, when an object is added in, all objects in Blender have what you call an origin point. So you can see this little orange yellow dot in the middle. If you come over here to this overlays and you go to the drop down, origins may not be ticked. So if it isn't, just make sure to click on it so you can see that origin point. And that is actually the point where things rotate around. So if you go R, where it rotates around it. If you go S, it scales from that point. And G, all of those transforms look at that origin point. So in 3D, I've already shown you guys previously how you can scale, move things around, rotate things. But how do you actually edit a piece of geometry? To do that, you can come up here and this is the object mode. And for now, don't worry about all of these options. Just focus on the edit mode. If you go into edit mode with an object selected, you're going to now actually see, instead of seeing not only the whole object, but you actually now see the vertices that make up these objects. In this case, you can see you can actually left click on an individual point. And just like you can move things in the object mode, you can also go G and R. At the moment, you can't really notice rotation. You'd have to select more than 2 to see that. But exact same thing. And this is how you can actually edit the shapes. You can see the origin point is still there in the middle, but if I were to actually just left click and drag to select all of this and then go G to move it off, if I now go back into object mode, you can see the origin point is still there where it is. So if I now go R to rotate, it's not going to look at the object, but actually the origin point. So it's important that you guys understand what the origin point is and how that all works. You can almost look in...
Double C すいませんダブルスインって言います戻ましてよいしょ。うわなんだあ つい癖でコントロール S をしてしまう。よしと。
object mode, an object in object mode as being just a collection of verts that are connected to this group, and the vertex is the center of it. So just look at it almost like a collection of points in 3D space. So now that you understand that, let's actually model here. So currently we have the X-ray toggled on. You can also toggle it off so you can see through. Completely up to you, but for now I'm going to press 1 to go into the front orthographic view. We have our image set up and we have our cube, which we're going to be using. And let's go G and then Z to restrict it to the Z. Let's just move it roughly to where the body is here. In fact, I'm going to turn the X-ray on for now so I can see. And let's go S and let's scale this down to about here. So it's almost the width of the body, like that. And as long as your cube's just roughly in the middle, it can be down a little bit or up, doesn't really matter. But what you're going to do is you're going to press Tab to go into edit mode, or you can just come up here and go into edit mode that way. And inside of edit mode, you're going to left click and just drag over these top vertices to have them selected like that. And then you're going to go S, X, and scale them on the X axis. You can even see up here, that red is the X. And you can actually see the numbers written here on the different colors, or the letters on the different colors. And then you're going to left click and drag and select the bottom ones, and you can go S, X, and scale them along the X. So now from the front it looks okay, but if we press 3 on the number pad, we can see on the right orthographic view that it's not quite matching up, so we can select these at the top by left clicking and dragging. And we can go S, Y, and flatten it on the Y. You can also just left click and drag and just select just the front ones or the back ones and go G and just move them like that. So we're currently in the right orthographic. And these ones here, they're more or less in the right place, but you can also move them if you wanted to. So now that we have that roughly in place, what we can do now is we can extrude this bottom face. So one way to do that is just left click and drag to select all of the bottom verts. But I'll quickly mention you also have these options up here for different selections. You can also click on the face mode, and now instead of selecting verts, you can select a face, which is a collection of verts and edges. So now you can just left click on that face, and then you can go back into your right orthographic view by hitting 3, and you can go E. So E is the shortcut to extrude. And that'll extrude a face. You can also come here and click on the extrude button here and it'll bring up some options, but it's easier just to use the shortcut. So I've extruded it down and then just left clicked. And then I'm going to just go R and I'm going to slightly rotate that face, and I'm going to go G and I'm just going to move it back. So one thing you'll notice is we're still using a lot of the same G, S, and R to scale, rotate, and move things, which is really cool. So now let's go to our front view by getting 1 on a number pad. And you can see here, it's kind of right at the bottom, but over here now, it is lacking the right dimension. So what we can do to add in an edge is we can just come over here, hovering over an edge, and you can go Control R or Command R if you're using a Mac, and you're going to see this yellow line up here. Once you see the yellow line, you can just left click twice, and it'll add it in. Then go back into your front orthographic view by hitting 1 on the number pad, S, X with that edge selected, and you can scale it out like that. Now let's just say you accidentally unselected that edge. How do you select it? By left clicking and dragging? No, not necessarily, because now that it's an edge select, you might select more edges than you wanted to. In some cases that would happen. So what you may want to do is you can actually, when there's a loop like this, you can go Shift Alt and then just left click on an edge and it'll select the whole loop. You can also just hold in Shift, and while you're holding in Shift and you're moving around, you can select multiple faces. So that's one thing to keep in mind if you guys struggle with that. That's how you select edges. So now we have that in there. If we now go to our right orthographic view by hitting 3, we can see it's not quite right. So let's go to our vertex select, left click and drag to select these verts, and let's just move them by pressing G. And you can see what we're doing here. Right? It's not hard at all. We're just creating the rough shape from the front and the side. And yes, it is boxy, but what we can do now is we can progressively add more topology. So let's come here to the middle, Control R, just like we did hovering over one of these edges. You should see the yellow line appear, and then left click twice. And now what we've done, we've cut it in half here. We have an edge. It's perfectly symmetrical, but we can cheat a little bit. We can actually mirror, so we only work on one side. So let's now left click and drag and just select these verts over here.
And let's press
Mirroring.
X and then go delete. And what are we working with? Vertices. So let's click delete vertices. And now we only have half an object. We can now go to the properties panel here and let's go to our modifiers. Modifiers are just these cool things we can add to an object. I won't go into too much details, but let's just go to the add modifier and let's just go and give this one under the generator, and that's a mirror. And all it's simply doing here is mirroring this object. So now we can't actually come here and select anything on this side, but if we select something on this side and we press G to move it or rotate it, you can see it updates on this side. But one of the issues is if we start moving things around, it pulls apart. So what we're going to do is we're going to come over here and click on this thing called clipping. And now if you move it, it all sticks together, which is really cool and it's going to help you a lot. Now going back into the front orthographic by pressing 1 on the number pad, you can actually see that little origin point that I talked about earlier is in the middle. And that's actually what our mirror modifier is looking at as a reference point. So now that we have that mirrored, what we can do is we can press 7 on our number pad to go to the top orthographic view. And this is looking boxy. So let's go Control R. And with Control R, we're going to see the yellow line appear over here. Let's double click by left clicking. And now what we can do is from the top, we can left click and drag and select the front verts over here in the corner, and we can go G and move them in a little bit, and then left click. And let's left click and drag over here, selecting these verts, and then let's go G and let's move them in like that. Now we simply rounded that out. So this is already starting to look a lot better, and we've just used some very simple modeling techniques. Let's also just select this vertex down here by left clicking on it, and let's just go X and delete that vertex. So we now have this open like so. And let's just also select this one at the top here. Let's go X and delete that vertex as well. Okay, so 1 to go back into the front orthographic view. Let's continue extruding this topology up and making the rest of the body. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to make sure we have our vertex select option enabled. We're still in edit mode. We're going to left click and drag in our front orthographic view. And we're going to select these verts over here. So once they are selected in your front orthographic view, remember 1 to go into front orthographic view, you're going to go E to extrude and then just move it up to about here on the reference, or just under the neck. And then you're going to go R, so R to rotate and rotate it this much, and then left click, and then just G again and just move it till it's lined up to the bottom of this V here, this delta. Then you're going to press 3 to go into your right orthographic view. And then you're going to go S, Y, and flatten it on the Y, like that. Okay, back into the front orthographic view. Let's go E to extrude and extrude it up like so. And leave it at about here. Let's go into our right orthographic view. And we're going to go S, Y, and scale it on the Y, about that much. And then we're going to go Control R, or Command R, hovering over one of these edges. You should see the yellow line. Then you're going to just left click once. And then if you move the mouse, you can slide. So you're going to slide it to about here. And then left click again, and that should put it in place. And while that is still active, you can go Alt S. And what is different about this, and I won't really get into normals at the moment too much, but you have these things on the faces called normals. They're like these directional points that the face is kind of like, I'll quickly show you because it's kind of hard to explain. I'm just going to enable something. You guys don't have to do this, but it's just so you understand kind of what's going on here. I'll quickly show you. So these things here, right, the normals. Now if you just press S by itself, it just scales everything as like an average. But if you go Alt S, it looks at these normals and it scales out along the normals, and it does it a little bit in a different way. So going Alt S will scale that out like this, nice and evenly. So I'm just going to turn that off that I turned on because I don't need to have that on right now. But you guys should understand where I'm coming from. So 1 to go back into the front orthographic view. I'm going to come over here, Control R over one of these edges. Left click once and then move the mouse to bring it down, and then Alt S and scale it out like that. And then just like that, we have this little thing forming here quite easily. And what we can do as well, just Control R, hovering over this edge here, double click to add in an edge, and over here as well, the back, Control R, and then double click. And now we have a bit more topology. I'm also just going to come in here, Control R, hovering over one of these edges, and just double click once to add in an edge. And that's most of the body done now. So let's just quickly make the leg. So instead of using existing topology in here, what we're going to do is we're going to go back into our object mode up here. And earlier I showed you guys how to add in an object. So we're going to go Shift A
we're going to go to our mesh options. We're going to add in something called a cylinder. So go ahead and add that in. Now this has got way too much geometry. So let's go over here to this add cylinder option down here. Just left click on it. It'll open it up. And currently this consists of 32 vertices. So let's click on here and type in 5. So now you can see it's a lot less topology. That's more like we want. We're going for the low poly workflow here. And you can also come here to the type and change it from whatever it's at and change it to nothing, so it won't have the caps on here on the end. Okay, so if you quickly go to your X-ray mode and just turn it off up here, you can kind of see it a little bit better. So for now, I'm just turning off the X-ray up here, the toggle. And this is now a new object. So if we selected this, and you can see up here, the cylinder is active up here in the scene collection. And we press tab to go into edit mode, or you can also come up here and go into edit mode. You should now see that you can't edit this object over here. You have to actually go back into object mode and then click on this again. But what you can do is you can hold in shift after you've selected one of the objects and then select the second object. Then when both are selected, you can see they're both active. You can press tab or go into edit mode, and now you can work with both of them. And when you go back into object mode, they're still both separate objects. Something interesting about objects that you guys can keep in mind. So we're in object mode again, just select this guy here. And remember that origin point, see that little orange dot? Same thing as the cube, we're gonna go S and just scale the whole thing down in object mode to about this scale. And then left click once you're done, and then go G and move it over here roughly, okay? Then you're gonna go and press free on your number pad to go to your right orthographic, and you're just gonna move it forward a little bit like that, just roughly in place. And now we can tab into edit mode. And while we're in our right orthographic view, let's just turn on our X-ray again up here. And this is left click and drag and just select these bottom verts. And let's just go G, move them down to here, and then go R to rotate them, and S to scale a bit. Then we're going to select these ones up here, move them forward, S to scale a little bit, just like that. Okay, now we have the leg starting to form here. And let's just click, drag, and select these bottom verts again. And what we're going to do is we're going to go E to extrude, and then we're going to go S to scale to about this much. And we're going to go G and move all of that forward a bit. And then we're going to go E to extrude, bring it to here. And then we're going to go E to extrude, S to scale, about that much. Okay. Back in your right orthographic view, you can just move this whole thing back by pressing G, S to scale it just a little bit, and then we're going to go E to extrude and extrude it down to here, R to rotate, and then S to scale till it matches up. And then what we're going to do is we're going to press 1 to go into our front orthographic view, and you can see over here, this comes out a little bit too much. So let's just select these verts over here, and let's just go G, move them in, left click and drag, select these two, and then G to move them in. Now you can see it's all starting to look pretty good. So how do we mirror this leg onto the other side? So we can do the exact same thing we did up here with the body. So we're going to go over here, and this time we're going to give it a mirror again under the modifiers. Okay, under the modifiers. And we don't have to enable clipping because these two objects are not actually touching like this one is over here. But you can notice there's not anything appearing here on the other side. And why is that? So if we tab back into object mode, what we have to do in this case, because that origin point is not in the middle here, like this one has its origin point in the middle, we have to actually select a mirror object as a reference. So in this case, we're going to click on this little eyedropper, and we're going to click on the body as a reference. So now it'll put it right in the middle, or the point where it's mirroring is going to be right in the middle of that body. So it's almost using the origin point of this one now, which is really good. So now it's nice and mirrored like that. And it's all starting to look really good. So let's just select these legs again, tab into edit mode. Let's just press free to go into our right orthographic view. Click and drag, select these bottom verts, and then go E to extrude, bring them down. R to rotate them, to flatten them out a bit. And then this is really simple. Just click and drag and select these verts over here.
勉強の動画を見て終わりました。誰も来ない。まあいい。というわけで、今日は誰も来ませんでしたが、チャンネル登録、いいね、お願いします。それじゃあ、今日はちょっと明日早いので落ちます。おやすみなさい。ありがとうございました。